You're not used to seeing yourself that
Oh,
way.
there we go.
Yeah.
But we are live and we're mirrors of ourselves. Hi everyone. Super excited about this panel today. We have some extraordinary women solving some massive problems within the women's healthcare space. Again, I'm Allie Wyatt. I am the co-founder and CEO of Female Founder Collective. We have the 10th House, which is our private membership community. We invite in cohorts 4 times a year in order to find resources, connections, and founders that are in similar stages to vent with them, as well as use them in your journey to help you sort of be the ways of the founder journey and see around corners and over hurdles. I am very excited, though, about this conversation today and was just fangirling over these ladies because there remains obviously a huge gender inequality gap in healthcare as we face gaps in research and treatment ability for areas that are unique to women. And by elevating the importance of this, we can deliver better, more inclusive data, insights, targeted, accessible solutions, and enable better care for women worldwide. So, in celebration of FFC's Women's Healthcare Month, we are joined by Hallie Tecco, who I'm going to go through her bio because she's an extraordinary entrepreneur, angel investor, podcast host, and she's passionate about fixing our healthcare system. She is the founder of Natalist, which was acquired by Everly Health in October 2021. And previously, Hallie founded and ran Rock Health, and also is an adjunct professor at Columbia Business School, teaching the first MBA level course on digital health investing. She has served as a board member to the International African American Museum since 2018, and as an advisor to the Harvard Medical School Department of Biomedical Informatics since 2014. I don't even know what that is, but it sounds incredibly impressive. And I've actually coined her on this call as the fairy godmother of the women's healthcare system. So that is what
I
she
like the
is.
little emoji. I'm going to start using that. Fairies.
And Agia Mathur has an extraordinary career as well, but she started a volunteer service to fill a community need in high school and founding a small business to provide affordable transportation to her undergraduate classmates, to now leading Avia to improve the health and wellness of people with uteruses. Agia Mathur is consistently bridging gaps and solving inefficiencies. Through personal and professional experiences, she found her passion at the intersection of healthcare, innovation, and analytics-driven insights. During her consulting career, she worked with various clients to improve patient experience. However, she found she needed to be closer to the end user to have the kind of impact she knew she could have. And certainly, last but not least, we have Dr. Yen. In 2016, she founded Pandia Health, the only doctor-led, women-led birth control delivery company that is building the online health brand Women Trust. The brand improves women's lives by providing a one-stop solution for prescription birth control and acne treatment. By providing online doctor's visits for prescriptions and automating medication delivery, Pandia Health empowers women with convenient, confidential, and reliable access to expert women's healthcare. The company was named to Inc.'s Best in Business Health Services and is co-founder and CEO. Dr. Sophia Yen, MD, MPH, was named as one of Inc.'s most dynamic women entrepreneurs. So, in other words, we have quite the lineup today of people who are very much experts in their fields. I'm going to go ahead and kick it off with a question for Dr. Yen because I wanted to address the elephant in the room, and that's that women's bodies, and this was a little known stat that I actually learned from the founder of Tia Health, have been virtually ignored for centuries. And it wasn't until 1993 that Congress wrote a National Institute of Health inclusion policy into federal law that encouraged women and minorities as subjects in clinical research. It's completely insane. So why do you think it took so long to put this into policy? And how do you think it held back the healthcare system previous to that?
So, first of all, I want to explain from the researcher scientist point of view, probably why this was done, that women and minorities weren't included. One is cost. In order to get minorities included, you have to have enough of them so that if you find a result that it's significant. And so if you want to include minorities, then you have to add extra money to include minorities. And the women part is just from a scientific point of view and liability point of view. If you're trying a new drug and the patient gets pregnant, then you don't know the fetal effects. And then if the woman is on her birth control, you don't know the hormonal effects. Is she menopausal? That's another effect. Is she cycling up and down? But I think it was mainly liability. If anybody gets pregnant while you're trying a new drug, you're going to get sued. And you're trying to do a new drug, you don't have time or the money to get sued. So I think that was probably it. And the reason why finally in 1993 this happened was, I think, one, we had enough women in Congress to push for this. So we need to elect more women officials. But two, we had more women in science saying, hello, we are 50% of the population. We give birth to all of the existence on this planet. We deserve to be, we are not just little men. And that has been similar with pediatrics. There's a lot of drugs that have never been tested technically in pediatrics. We just take the adult dose and like do it milligram per kilogram and throw it at children. So it's absolutely, I think, a time of awareness that not everyone is a variant of what we were all taught in medical school. And I went to medical school in 93. 70 kilo white male is the basis of 95% of medicine. And thank you, 1993. Hopefully more women have been in more research, but we still, I think, deserve equal funding. And I don't think we see at least equal funding for the same diseases that affect women: endometriosis, fibroids, menopause is the wild, wild west. And realizing again that women are not men. We have estrogen, we lose estrogen, and how does that affect our bones, our brains, our hearts, et cetera? Very different from someone who doesn't lose estrogen at around 50 years old.
And going sort of deeper into this topic about education too around women's health, Hallie, I want to turn this to you. You talk about how women's health is actually an elective in many med schools. And oftentimes we believe our doctors are gaslighting us and don't fully understand us. But is this partially due to how they are educated in the medical education system?
Yeah, well, I think just to preface the problem, 1 in 5 women report having felt a healthcare provider has ignored or dismissed their symptoms. And 45% of women said they've been labeled as chronic complainers. And so you can imagine a lot of women aren't even sharing their full medical history or the symptoms that they're facing due to fear of being judged by a physician. And I don't think that all providers gaslight. Certainly, there are amazing providers out there, but I don't think that our system is set up to really help providers meet their full potential in working with female patients. Appointment times are extremely short. I just had my annual. Maybe I had 8 minutes with my doctor. I had maybe 10 minutes with the nurse before that. And I probably got more value out of that time with the nurse or the PA than with my physician. Providers are burnt out, especially female providers. They're absolutely burnt out. And most folks in the system just don't have the capacity to change things. We have built our system on a fee-for-service model, and that has led to, for someone who's young and otherwise looks healthy, kind of in and out, check the box and move on. And so I think because of that, women feel like they're not being heard. And I think the response is these amazing companies that we're starting to see, like Pandia Health, like Avia, like Tia, that are women who've been through this, who want to solve the problem and actually give women the sort of respect, time, and attention that we so desire.
And I'm going to now flip it over to you, Agia. What have been the most major discoveries or advances in healthcare since including women in these studies that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, many. And I hope that this is just the first inning, not to use the sports analogy when talking about women's health, but I hope that we're just at the starting line, if you will, where, one of the things that I actually say often also, and I heard Dr. Yun say, is like, women are not just little men. That is just something that I can't stress enough to anybody, where we're excluded from these studies because of our pesky hormones. That was literally written in a paper once. And what does that mean for us now going forward? Now that we have been included now in some studies, and there's still so much to go, seeing that difference has really unraveled a whole slew of things. So starting with this women's health specific concerns. So that's something that I like to make really clear, is that women's health is not just making babies, preventing babies. Like, that is not all it is. While our ovaries, our uteruses, and our hormones are a big part of it, and there's breast cancer screening, different things like that, reproductive health, menopause, as we talked about, maternal health. Those are very specific pieces that have come out. But since we will talk a bit more about that, I'm going to skip through that. Another part that's actually really near and dear to my heart is cardiovascular disease. This was something, again, really predominantly focused on men. There's one of my dear friends is building a company in actually women's cardiovascular disease to show how the symptoms are different, to show how the risk factors are different, to hopefully then lead to diagnostic tools that are really going to help women in how to treat their symptoms, and how they're actually showing that they might be having a heart attack in the near future, whatever it may be. Definitely also on the drug side, I believe that this was brought up earlier as well, but there are different drugs that, again, you can't just change. Because we're not little men, you can't just take it from a kilogram perspective. There are specific drugs that literally impact a woman in a different way, regardless of if you're the same size as that 70 kilogram male or not.
And
I just think the little men.
The men is cracking me up every time we say that.
I keep a straight face. I can't keep a straight face.
The visual of that is quite amazing too. But my question about that, and not to be ignorant, but I think for the sort of layperson that is not actually in the women's healthcare field, why is it important that women are tested differently and looked at differently? Like, from the composition of our bodies, is it because of the hormonal factors? Is it, why aren't we little men? It's, I guess, what I'm trying to.
Let's ask the doctor in the room.
Well, basic biology, XX versus XY. The Y chromosome is actually missing a leg equivalent of genetics. So we have an extra genetics there, but definitely the estrogen, progesterone, that puts us up for, blood clots, the monthly cycling up and down, moods, it exacerbates diabetes, seizure, anything. And so that's why one of the things we promote is #periods optional. And so if you're bleeding every single month, that is so 2020, get with the times, get with 2023. You don't have to bleed every month. And using the IUD, the implant, the shot, the pill, the patch, the ring, if you can maintain a stable hormone, one, better for research, but two, better for life, so that there isn't this up and down, like messing with you all the time. So women are not men. And the example that Agia didn't give that might help people is they've shown with certain sleeping drugs that when women took it, they had like hallucinations. And I do think it was a dose thing, that women are not 70 kilos. All of medicine is based on 70 kilos. I come from pediatrics. We dose everything in milligrams per kilograms. And so it blows my mind that you have a 130-pound woman, you're giving her the same dose that you would give 160, 200-pound dude. And it's not the same. And if you took the dose 1/3, I bet you'd get a different result. So I do think part of it is just pure, mass, pounds, kilos, whatever you're doing. But the other part is absolutely hormonal. And I don't think we're that different.
Levels of fat in their, your percentage of fat in your body is supposed to be higher than men. And so how does that interact with
that? Absolutely affects drugs that either are stored in the fat or, metabolized, held differently in the fat. And particularly adolescents, it's upsetting for them because the young women or XX start putting on boobs and hips, and then the XY start building muscle, and then there's anorexia, eating disorders, etc. Yeah. So that just biologically, as you can see, as you said, the fat difference.
I think when digital health, one of the biggest areas of promise is personalized medicine. And so it's so absurd that for most of medicine, we're still categorizing everybody as the standard white male. And I think a big example of this is the trash measure of BMI. BMI is so flawed. It has very racist histories. It wasn't even developed by someone within the medical system. It was developed by a mathematician on a male European body as like the perfect body. And now we're applying it to everyone and labeling people with high BMI, obesity, like without taking into account kind of their full health. And so what's happened is, BMI, if you're tall, if your body mass or your body fat is distributed differently, but you're perfectly healthy, you can appear to a physician as someone and you are labeled as obese.
So I am an obesity expert. I work at Stanford's weight clinic. And so BMI is not the definition of obesity. BMI is a indicator. Look out for obesity, then talk to the patient, assess their diet, etc. We cannot completely trash BMI because BMI does take into account the height. And specifically with birth control and emergency contraception specifically, the research has been done with body mass index to account for people's height. Because when people say don't use Plan B if you're 136 pounds or greater, that doesn't apply to different heights. That assumes you're 5'6", and the average height in America is not 5'6".
But there are places in medicine where BMI is automatically disqualifying people, including in egg freezing and egg donation. If you have a BMI over 30, you can't donate your eggs, and that's absurd. Like you can be perfectly healthy with a BMI of 30, and to be disqualified automatically without a look at your entire health.
I absolutely agree with that. But don't trash the BMI, perhaps trash the way it's being used and trash the doctors that are using it in the wrong way. But BMI has been studied for emergency contraception. If your BMI is 26 or greater, Plan B does not work so well. And if your BMI is 30 or greater, it doesn't work at all. And this has been proven because of fat distribution, height, etc. It doesn't work. And we don't want people getting pregnant and being like, BMI sucks, trash that. No, we need to check your BMI for Plan B if you're going to take it. Or even better, I don't get paid by this company. Ella works up to a BMI of 35. And if your BMI is 35 or greater, then you can use IUDs for emergency contraception.
Got it.
I want to put in one more thing real quick before we move off of this topic that I'm also very excited about. I talked about my that cardiovascular disease is near and dear to my heart, but also mental health. This is something that I know a lot of people are thinking about, are also looking into or studying from a company perspective. But this is where we're also seeing more studies done on and findings on gender-specific risk factors and things like that. So I just want people to be aware that that is being studied at this point.
Which is great. I think specificity in medicine, a little more personalization, specificity seems like it needs to be taken into account. And I think as we scratch the surface of women's healthcare, that certainly seems to be the case. But let's get into your individual businesses, because you all are doing different things in different spaces. So I want to dive in. I want to start with Hallie. So what specific problem does your business address? And in this case, maybe it's Natalist or some of the businesses you're investing in, and what case studies or stats really turned you on to this and made you feel like this is something that cannot be ignored?
Yeah. Well, I'd actually love to talk about my current company, Co-Fertility, where I'm co-founder and chair. And we realize that the best time to freeze your eggs is usually when you can least afford it. And so we're out to make egg freezing more accessible. For me personally, it's one of my biggest regrets in life that I didn't freeze my eggs sooner. I went through many years of IVF to have my miracle child, and I'm so grateful for that. But that experience has led me to now start two companies. It was the reason I started Natalist, and now is the reason I helped start Co-Fertility. So our KEEP program gives egg freezers access to exclusive discounts at clinics and with storage providers, which helps bring down the cost and also bringing in kind of the community aspect of it. We found a study that showed that women who undergo egg freezing are like unhappy that they're having to do it. They feel like their life isn't working out as planned. And we think that it should be a celebratory moment, an exciting, empowering step in your life. And so just bringing that community element and having women freeze their eggs in cohorts makes it a little less lonely. We also have a program we call Split, and it allows qualified egg freezers to freeze their eggs for free and have them stored for 10 years for free when they donate half to a family that couldn't otherwise conceive. In terms of stats, I would say the one that we just heard from, I think it was ASRM or SART, one of the large groups within the reproductive health space, is that egg freezing cycles surged during COVID, and they were up 46% year over year in 2021. So, enormous growth, a lot of interest in egg freezing, yet cost is an enormous barrier. And at Cofertility, we're trying to tackle the cost piece.
Can you speak to how much it is for those who aren't aware? Because I wasn't aware of how expensive it is. And I was talking to a friend of mine who was contemplating it. She's in her mid-30s and she is single and she just wanted it as an option. She's like, I would definitely do it, but it's just too expensive.
I know. It can be about $15,000 when you take into account medications. It's different for everyone because everyone needs a different level and a different combination of medications for ovarian stimulation based on your ovarian reserve. And then it's funny, it depends on where you live. And actually, if you live somewhere that has more clinics like New York City, you actually find that the prices are more reasonable because the clinics are competing with each other. But if you're someone, unfortunately, who lives somewhere with only one clinic, in a lot of ways, those clinics can set their price. So it does vary across the country. And while some employers do offer egg freezing benefits, they tend to be really large tech companies, and it's really just a small percentage of the population that gets egg freezing covered by their employer.
Wow. Huge problem. Love that you're solving this. And I'm going to go to you, Agia, and I want to ask you the same question for Avia in terms of Avia. I just want to call it Avia. But for Avia,
funny, I never noticed how your name and company are so similar until
I know.
Holly keeps saying them.
It's one of those things where neither did we until we went to go tell people after we named it.
That's amazing.
It sounded good to your ears.
We actually wanted Avia, but it's a shoe brand that has pretty good SEO. So we're like, we're not going to compete with that. But it's supposed to be like avian themed, sky's the limit for you to soar. Yeah. So Avia, we, if I wanted to tell you my entire life story, I could. And it really does feel like everything I've done, both personally and professionally, has led me to starting this company, even though I didn't know at the time. Avia itself, we are a daily ovarian hormone health app. We help people understand based off of where they are in their cycle, how it impacts them personally, and then give them recommendations of what they can do accordingly, and also just like plan ahead of time. So we actually plan our board meetings based off of when I'm in the best situation to prep. I do my workouts accordingly now. I wish I would have known earlier in life. And this is actually what happened from a personal experience. I'm a science nerd. I took the MCAT, thought I was going to be an MD, PhD. And when I went through some personal health stuff, I started doing my own research because I was like, I don't understand what's going on, why this is happening, what this means, and came across this whole ovarian hormone health cycle. And I was like, frustrated. And now I almost laugh about it, but I would have planned when I took the SATs accordingly, as captain of my basketball team, captain of my basketball team, captain of my soccer team, would have had my teams train accordingly because your quality of muscle toning changes, your risk of injury changes depending on where you are in that month. Actually, the U.S. women's national soccer team trains based off of their cycles. And so that was, yeah. And so that was like, it was a personal experience that had me very frustrated, but it's when I met my now co-founders who had the same experiences where they were like, I didn't know this. One of my co-founders was losing her vision, where she was having what she didn't know was hormonal migraines, but she would lose her vision every 2 to 3 months. And only once working with a very specific doctor did she realize that's what it was. Otherwise, they were looking for brain damage, eye damage, different disorders. And nobody asked her, when in your cycle does this come? And
Yeah.
so that was like very much anecdotal of what we went through and the things that we said, we don't want other people to ever go through these situations again. And forget going through situations. We want people to be able to plan accordingly and really optimize how they're, whether it's working out, planning their board meetings, whatever it may be. So what we did in terms of when you talk about numbers, we learned from a 7,000 person study that most people, actually 98 to 99% of them, only think that their period and fertility or their hormones impact their period and fertility, when in reality, it's your quality of sleep, quality of muscle toning, energy levels, sex drive, skin, mental health, mood, the list goes on. And through Avia, people have actually helped diagnose at their doctors as well.
That's amazing. Can you give us some examples of, I know you were talking about what it impacts, but like where in your cycle, for example, would be optimal to work out, or maybe how a certain point in your cycle affects how you sleep?
Yeah, for sure. So actually for me, sleep is the big one that I learned through Avia itself. But actually the one that since we were talking about mental health earlier, that's one I'd love to talk about real quick. But there's we've actually had multiple people who have been diagnosed with depression. And they start tracking, they're tracking for something else within Avia. And then they end up taking their data to their doctor. And they realize that actually these depressive symptoms have only been coming during a specific time of the month. And that's when when progesterone levels, estrogen levels, how they're changing is impacting how their depressive symptoms are. And that's actually called PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder. Premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which is different from depression and what's causing it. And so that's where, and Dr. Yen, if there are different elements here that you can add in, would love for that. But even from a workout perspective, when you are at the beginning of your cycle is actually characterized as the first day of your period. And when you start your period to about halfway through your cycle is when there's actually more, it's better to do higher, not necessarily it's better to do, but it's, if you're going to do high intensity workouts, that's the better time to do them versus during the second half, usually having lower intensity. So we recommend more of the yogas, power walks, things like that. So all of these things, depending on where you are in your cycle, can be changed. You can plan accordingly. And this is what we're helping people do within our app.
I love that. And actually, when I'm about to have my cycle or having my cycle, it's like I need to do low impact, like strength workouts as opposed to sprinting around and feeling pretty awful.
I mean, getting myself to the gym when I have my period. Just
can't.
Yeah,
it's that alone.
Can't get out of bed.
But love this. And then I want to, of course, again, last but not least, Dr. Yen wanted to get those case studies that inspired you to start Pandia, and specifically what problems or solutions you're addressing.
So several motivators to start Pandia Health. Pan is every, Dia is day. So we want to be with you every day. If that helps people remember how to spell it and how to pronounce it, that's useful. And then it's also the Greek goddess of healing, light, full moon. So we're all about women's empowerment. Was giving a talk to a bunch of doctors. Why don't women take their birth control? And one of the top reasons was didn't have time to go to the pharmacy, didn't have it in their hand. And my friend and I were like, we can solve this. We will just ship you birth control until you tell us to stop. And then we ran ads, free birth control delivery. 60% of the people that responded didn't have a prescription. And it's like, don't you know you need a prescription in the United States to get birth control pills, patches, and rings? And I'm a doctor, so I write prescriptions, and thus Pandia Health was born. If you have a prescription and you have insurance, you pay us nothing and you get free delivery, set it and forget it. One of our mantras, no one runs out of birth control on our watch, to the best of our ability. If your insurance is evil, that's a totally different thing. And then also started this company for me so that I would never run out of birth control. Started this company for my daughters so that they don't have to worry about this. And if anyone else was providing care at the level we're providing, I'd step aside. But they're not. We are the only academic doctor-led company in this space. I realized what I was taught at UCSF and Stanford works great if you're a Caucasian female that wants to bleed every month. But if you're Asian or Black, I spoke to my fellow Asian and Black doctors like, oh yeah, that doesn't work. And I look back and I had to go through 3 different drugs until I found one that didn't give me side effects. So using my MIT, UCSF, Stanford brain, took all the birth control pills, ranked them from most likely make you bleed, least likely make you bleed, most likely give you munchies, least likely to give you munchies, most likely give you zits, least likely to give you zits. And our doctors are trained on this algorithm to minimize side effects. And then we do a 10-week follow-up. You all good? You having zits? You having breakthrough bleeding? Then our doctors know what birth control to move you to. And with that, we have 82% retention in a year for newbies on birth control versus the standard 55% retention. And we also have amazing customer service at 4.9 out of 5 stars on Google reviews. Check out my competitors. They're nowhere in the same league. So started this company to prevent unplanned pregnancy, started this company to make women's lives better, realizing that we've brought better than UCSF Stanford care to women wherever you have internet and a mailbox.
Love that. Could have used that when I was younger, for sure.
And we're going into menopause, so that's coming up.
Wonderful. I'm not quite there yet, but I guess I'm within the age range where I could be. The other question I do have for you is, so it sounds like you have a 10-week follow-up, and like you said, you had tested all these different birth controls and then given it a sort of assessment based off a variety of factors. In terms of the individual that you're prescribing, do they come to you with a desire for a specific brand, or is there some sort of assessment or quiz that they take initially to help understand which one's going to be right for them and sort of what their birth control journey is going to look like?
Yes. So from the safety side, we've taken the protocol that California approved for pharmacists to prescribe birth control and added a layer of doctor. And then given our knowledge, I'm an adolescent medicine specialist. So we make sure women are on enough estrogen to protect their bones so that when they're 50, 60 years old and they fall down some stairs, they don't break their hip, they don't break their wrist. So one, Pandia public service announcement for today, anybody on the birth control pill, check how many micrograms of estrogen. And if you're under 30, it should be at least 30 micrograms. If it is less than that, your doctor doesn't know adolescent medicine. Your doctor doesn't understand bone health. The doctors at Stanford Pediatric Adolescent Gynecology, Pediatric Adolescent Medicine, and Pediatric Endocrinology all agree at least 30 micrograms of estrogen until 30. Because a lot of women are like, I want the minimum hormones possible. And if your doctor doesn't understand birth control, doesn't understand bone density, then you will be on a low dose.
Interesting. Yeah, I would have been that person that said I want minimum hormones possible, because my experience was I went crazy on it. So you're definitely doing a service to all women out there. I'm going to go to Hallie and Dr. Yen. You've invested in such incredible women's health organizations, both of you. Are there any white spaces within women's health? And I know, Hal, you started to touch on this earlier, that you feel haven't been fully explored or addressed from an investor's perspective.
Gosh, I get this question a lot. I think the last year Raquel published data on this was 2021. I don't think we've had it since, but then at that time, we found that companies specifically addressing women's health made up 7% of all digital health funding. Given that women make up 50% of the population, I would say the entire space is underfunded and is a white space. I think that there's not a place within women's health that is 100% fully serving women. I think there's a lot of really great companies that are really promising, but I wouldn't say that like there shouldn't be more, because there absolutely should be.
Yeah, just because there's a very large total addressable market. What about you, Dr. Yen? What do you think? Are there also, like, are there specific areas where you feel like, okay, there's been a lot of companies entering this space. There still needs to be more, obviously, but I haven't seen businesses entering XY space.
Yes. So I see a ton of companies entering menopause, and I'm concerned because it's the wild, wild west. And supplements are not FDA regulated, they aren't tested. Are there randomized clinical trials for whatever this person is trying to sell you? I believe in evidence based, cutting edge medicine and science, and know that 30% of the time, if I give you placebo, which is water and sugar, it will work 30% of the time. But people are charging $100, $200. And menopause, I'm seeing pellets. If anyone is putting pellets under your skin, no, that is some crazy stuff. I don't even know how that's
What
how
are
that's
pellets?
legal. So people are doing testosterone pellets in women, putting it under their skin, and it's giving them vigor and libido. And we don't know the distribution of the testosterone. It varies per person. Once it's in your body, we can't take it out like that. If anybody's doing pellets, ladies, just say no and walk away. But what could be useful that blows my mind is there's a menopause patch, but it's twice a week. And as an anal retentive scientist, OCD person, how do I break this into 3.5 days exactly? Like, how ridiculous is that? We need a 1 week patch, please, people. And then there is a vaginal ring for birth control that has both estrogen and progesterone, but there isn't the same for menopause. So you have to put a vaginal ring for estrogen, and then you have to take a daily pill for progesterone. And the reason I think for this is because back in the day, like 80% of women would have a hysterectomy. They would be like, oh, you're done with babies? Let's take it all out. And the US still has
80%?
It was huge. It was like the number one surgery second to circumcision. And they've now since stopped doing that because there are consequences to taking out your uterus and having a gap and everything else falls in, and there's prolapse and there's side effects. But I was just on another talk that if you have BRCA, then you have an increase of cancer, and the hormones on the uterus increases uterine cancer. So maybe better to take out the uterus so you don't have risk of uterine cancer. So there's just many things you need to weigh on that. But the reason why they have it separate is they assumed you didn't have a uterus. So then you didn't need the progesterone. The progesterone and any hormone therapy for menopause, et cetera, is to make sure the uterus doesn't get endometrial cancer. But if you don't have a uterus, then you don't need it. But like, why do I have to have a ring in my vagina and pills? Why can't the ring deliver both? And there's no implants. It'd be nice to have an implant. It'd be nice to have an IUD that did, both of the situation. But so there's huge drugs that could happen in menopause that need to be out there. And then again, racial/genetic differences. The cool thing is as more people get 23andMe, DNA, Ancestry.com, they can provide their genetics and we can be like, you have this SNP, this is the best birth control for you. You have this SNP, this is the best obesity treatment for you. This is the best menopause treatment for you. And that's what we're going to do at Pandia Health. If people have their DNA, you want to share it with us for the sake of science, we'll start running it with, race and side effects and just seeing what pill is best for you based on your genetics, because my daughters are half Korean, half Taiwanese. And if they marry a Black person or a Latino or a Caucasian, what will their kids need? So genetics is absolutely the way to go in the future. And then dementia. I think there is a lot of research yet on menopause, hormone, estrogen, dementia, and we don't have all the data there, but it's leaning towards that estrogen before the age of 60 and perhaps continued after that will help decrease dementia, because dementia is huge and really scary. Mm-hmm. And we as those with uteri often get stuck with the caretaking.
Yeah. I'm going to go to Agya and Holly again, because I wanted to ask you all about generally people coming in as entrepreneurs as well as investors coming into the healthcare space. I think it's incredibly intimidating, right? There's a lot of regulations that you have to consider. There's so many factors. My question for you is, what has been your experience, and maybe I'll start with you, Agya, navigating the healthcare space, and how has that been different from your previous experiences for those people that are maybe thinking about starting a women's healthcare business or feel like they have a great solution, but are very overwhelmed at the task of entering the space?
I feel like this could be a panel itself. Just start there. So I spent a number of years when I was in consulting, working across payer, provider, pharma, pharmacy, you name it. When I went to MIT for business school, that's where I knew that what I wanted to do was, rather than looking at what these players wanted, I wanted to look at what the end user wanted.
Yeah.
Because that's where I felt like a lot of these players were not paying attention to. Actually, one of them, a very well-known pharma, they had a plan to do something. I can't share major details here, but they were going to make $1 billion off of it in 5 years. And I was like, if we just look at it from this angle, with with how these users actually interact with this, they were able to then change it to $5 billion in 5 years. That's huge. And so that's something that I know the question is on how to navigate the healthcare system. I think that part itself is just really important to recognize, is what is your end goal with what you're trying to do? Are you trying to do something that's going to help the payers? Are you doing something that's going to help the providers? Are you doing something that's going to help a pharmacist? Or are you doing something that ultimately you want to help the end user? Because I think that there is still a disparity there. I know, Hallie, you can probably speak to how your companies have been very much D2C companies themselves. Also, what does that look like if you wanted to try to sell that through the healthcare system? So a big part of it starts to become how to get the lay of the land. I actually did a whole mapping of the system a few years ago, which I'm happy to share at another time, where understanding who plays with who plays nice with who, and who doesn't play nice with who is important. But if you're looking to start a direct-to-consumer company, I definitely wouldn't let that be a barrier to you getting up and out, because that's something that I will help you with. That's something that your advisors, investors will help you with, but that's not something that you should be letting be a barrier to you getting out there to build something that's going to have a true impact on the end user themselves. Business model is a completely different story there, though. So if you think that this is something that, yes, it's going to impact the end user, but I don't know that the end user is going to pay for this, that's where then you have to think about, all right, is this something that they expect the payers to pay for this? Is this something that they expect to come with when they go to the doctor? And I know Dr. Yen can speak about that more from the insurance and from the doctor perspective, but those are things that you can figure out. And there are so many resources. You don't have to have worked in healthcare before. In fact, many of my founder friends who are in women's health or in healthcare specifically have not worked in healthcare before. And if anything, hopefully that keeps you from getting bogged down by a lot of the details and feeling like, oh, I can't do this because this person doesn't do this. You will try to break barriers, really break the ceiling there to make things happen that you know should happen.
That's encouraging, though, that you feel like, and that you know people that have gone into the space who don't necessarily come from the space and are able to navigate it, because it does seem mildly impossible from the outside.
I get that, but 100% you can and you will. And I think that the biggest thing as an entrepreneur is to have grit, to know that what you're solving is worth solving and that you are having an impact. And if you have that, nothing will stand in your way. Not the 99 investors that are going to say no, not the healthcare system, nothing.
Yeah.
And Hallie, I want to go to you too, because I wanted to ask from the investor side as well. You know, as investors want to get into the space, right? Clearly, there needs to be more funding in this space, as we've all discussed. There's just not nearly enough going into women's health. So let's get more people in. Let's get a lot of women in. How do they think about doing diligence, right, with a healthcare company if they have no experience? And then once they are on the cap table, so they do invest, how can they add value to, or say to that company, hey, I can add value through this, even if they have no prior experience?
Yeah. I mean, I do think as an investor, it's important to not invest out of your wheelhouse. I turn down deals all the time because I just don't understand enough about the industry, and I don't think I can be helpful, and I don't think I can make a good bet. I've been diving into my data now that I've been investing for 10, 15 years. I've looked at the companies I've invested over time, and the companies that have done the best are the ones in healthcare and in women's health. When I try to dabble in other things, like it just hasn't worked out for me. So I do think that there's something to be said about investing in what you know. That being said, like everyone's a healthcare person. We have all interacted with the system in one way or the other. We all have bodies. So I do think that healthcare is a space where, like, you know, you might not think you're a healthcare person, but you know what? You probably are. You've probably had an intense experience. Certainly if you're a mother, you've had an intense experience with the healthcare system. And if you want to deepen your understanding, there are a lot of ways to do that. I think there are a lot of resources out there. I would, go about it the way you go about any curiosity you have. I would talk to people. I would listen to podcasts, like my podcast, The Heart of Healthcare, to plug it. I would read books. I would subscribe to Stat News. I would subscribe to Healthcare Brew. There are a ton of great resources out there to kind of get you comfortable with how the healthcare system works. And you don't have to understand the entire system. There are certainly areas within healthcare that I still, after working in this industry for a long time, really don't understand how they work. Like, I really don't know much about clinical trials and how that works. And, but I know a lot about women's health and how that works. So I think when you say healthcare, like pick a lane within healthcare that you're really passionate about and invest in companies in those space. So maybe it's mental health, maybe it's women's health, whatever it is. And I think that's the way that you can become an expert, which is don't try to be an expert in every area in healthcare. Try to like be focused on something. And in terms of the last part of your question is like, how can you really help companies that you do invest in? Be patient. That's like the biggest thing. Building in healthcare is really hard. You will never meet a healthcare founder that is not tired and beaten down and exhausted. It takes longer to scale. There's more regulatory hurdles. There's a longer time horizon to build customer trust. But it's also the number one area and opportunity to make a difference and improve the human experience. So I think it's worth it. I think it's worth it to be patient. So just be patient with the founders, because these businesses don't look like other tech businesses, but they're even more rewarding. And I think you can have an even bigger impact on your investment.
I just wanted to throw out there, if people want to dip their toe into investing, there's Portfolio, which educates. They have like funds and they do the due diligence with their experts, and then you can ask questions and you get to see pitches, and you can be as involved as you want or not as involved as you want. And then there's also Corliss, which used to be SheEO. It's a nonprofit. You donate $1,100, and then they compile it amongst 500 people, have $500,000, and vote on 5 companies that are female-founded, female-led that you want to invest in. And they do due diligence and stuff like that. And so I think you can learn something from them. And then lastly, One World is a social impact, and they're just trying to get people more into investing. And a lot of people with uteri control philanthropic funds. So I want to make sure they know about Impact Assets, which is a donor advised fund to which you can donate, get a tax deduction, but focus your investment in something that has social good, such as Avia, Pandia Health, or Co-Fertility, et cetera, while using the funds of your foundation or donor advised fund.
I didn't know you could use staff funds to invest in for-profits. Very cool.
Yes.
That's a great
Impact Assets.
And then the returns you can then donate.
Redonate. Yeah, exactly.
That's smart.
The other thing I want to add as a founder looking at investors too is that in our first institutional round, we actually brought together 2 co-leads. One, depending on what your business is, it may or may not make sense, but one who was a digital health focused fund, and one that was a consumer fund that didn't really dabble in digital health. But we wanted the 2 so that, because we sit at the intersection of them. And even with our angel investors, we have our fairy godmother like Hallie, we've got the Toy and Ajayi, we've got doctors, we have different healthcare specific angel investors. But then I also very specifically went out and found angel investors who are really good at brand, really good at engineering, really good at specific things that we were going to be up against in the next 18 months. but maybe they're not someone who's had the experience in healthcare, but that's not as necessary at that point.
Got it. And how did you go about looking for those, Agia? Because I think that's and Hallie and Sophia, feel free to weigh in on this as well. I think all of our founders are always asking, where do we find valuable advisors or investors that are going to be on our cap table? Like, how did you go about that initial search?
That's also a whole other panel we can do. I just did
I
one
know, right?
recently. But the biggest thing there is being very intentional and being very personalized also. At least that's how I approach it. Is I thought through, okay, I think I had a list of 12 things that I was like, I want an expert in each of these areas before I close my round. And I want to make sure more than 50% of these people have ovaries themselves. And I want to make sure over 50% of these people have started a company themselves. And so I was very intentional about what I was looking for. And in each of those 12, I started reaching out, some people I had relationships, the founder of Whoop, for example, at the time, and CTO of Whoop, we had already been, speaking about a few other things. I was like, all right, I'm raising a round. Would you come in? And he was very excited to come in. Like, that's a personal connection already, versus there were some people where either someone I knew I had to reach out, very much warm intros. There were no cold outreaches. Hallie, for example, I was introduced through the person who was leading the round. So different ways to connect with people like that. Definitely some of them longer term versus some of them is a little bit more immediate turnarounds.
But I love the intentionality.
Introduced us, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So don't be afraid to reach out to men too. We hear horror stories, and I've heard so many horror stories about male investors not getting it, but there are investors who really, 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 really want to get into the space.
Our two co-leads at our seed round were both male investors.
And it's risky to reach out because you could have a terrible experience, but maybe find male investors who've actually been vocal about wanting to invest in women's health. We need their help. We need all the help we can get. So
I think to your point, Hallie, earlier, because you talked about the fact, invest in something and I've found the same thing as an investor too, where the places that I know or the people that I know, right? I might not know their industry, but I know that these people are incredible founders. Those have been the ones that have worked. But the question there then is, it's going to lead you to a lot of men, because the healthcare system is also dominated by men already. So you're not going to find quite as few women with that domain expertise. But that being said, what I would love to understand is how a founder of a women's healthcare company might think about pitching to men and positioning it. Maybe Agia, you look like you might want to have something to say about this.
I mean, I have so many things to say about fundraising, but I will keep this very short. I'll keep it to 3 things. One is, regardless of if they're male or female, I think that the best attitude to go into it with is you truly have to date 99 duds before you find your stud. Like, whether they're male or female, just expect to talk to so many people, especially if you're a first-time founder. If you've started multiple companies, it's very different. If it's you are not very well connected, all of these things, I think that mindset just helps, because then you don't feel as defeated when you hear your first 10 no's and when you hear your first 15 no's. So I think that that's one. Number 2 there also is, I used an analogy just now earlier where I was like, oh, we're in the first inning. I speak to sports so much. I lean into it hard, where I'm like, I saw that you played tennis in high school or in college. What if your tennis career could have been improved by knowing where you are in your cycle? And leaning into that. And then the third is that there's been so much study on bias when it comes to female founders versus male founders. So for female founders, they'll ask you more questions of like what you've done, versus for male founders, they'll ask you what you're going to do. I take the what have you done questions and turn them into this is what we're going to do. They won't even know that you did that. But there are just different things like that you should go. Anyways, I can keep going, but I'm going to stop there.
Yeah. I think those are great pieces of advice. Someone told me early in my career that you should ask for money when you want advice and ask for advice when you want money. I think the sentiment is that you can and should build these relationships early, but don't ask for money too early, because if you're fundraising before you're really ready and someone passes, they could have that like preconceived notion down the line when you are actually ready and in a better position. So I think being careful about when to fundraise, and you'll waste a lot of time if you try to fundraise prematurely. So getting your ducks in a row, whatever that means, like prototype, some sort of MVP, or maybe that's some sort of traction, a team, whatever that is. You have to kind of find the right time to go out where you're going to increase your chances of success, and maybe talk to 100 and maybe 3 of them will be interested. Whatever that ratio is, you want it to be as high as possible.
99 duds before you're stud. Love it.
And you have to know the
Yen.
right stages too, just to build on what Hallie's saying is that I'm very candid about this. When we were raising our like angel round, I got distracted by the shiny object of seed stage companies or seed stage firms reaching out to us. And I was like, oh, they're interested in us. Maybe they want to invest. But at that time, nobody had told me that they do a lot of information gathering. And so I got hopeful, I wasted time. And so when we raised our next round, I basically cut out anyone who doesn't write certain amount of checks, don't invest at a certain stage. And if they reached out to me, I'd say, hey, I'm happy to circle back with you in 6 months or something like that.
Yeah. This is a very controversial piece of advice, but I'm going to give it. Try to talk to partners when you can. Like associates, especially women of color who are associates and principals and working so hard. Like, I don't want to write them off, but at the same time, the partners are making the decisions, and you really want, if you can, you're going to have a better chance of getting the deal if you have that meeting directly with the partner. And so building those relationships with the person who's writing the check is going to save you the most time. And so when you're getting, like, if you have angel investors or industry leaders who are making those introductions, like, ask who are the people you're going to introduce me to, and see where they are in the firm, and really like spend most of the time with the people who can actually write the checks. And I'll say just what I guess said earlier, like there are a lot of VCs, especially associates, who are really just information gathering. They're out there trying to understand the market to compare you to your competitors, and it'll totally waste your time. So try to avoid that if you can.
So we have just a couple minutes left. So I'm gonna jump in with 2 final questions. One question I'm gonna direct to you, Dr. Yen, because you talked about, again, money towards specific women's health issues. So can you enlighten us on that process, and then share with any of the folks that are watching how they can be helpful in putting more money towards women's health issues?
Yes. So Portfolio is a great option. Astia, I forgot to mention, is another great option. If you want to donate, Springboard Enterprise is a nonprofit that has an accelerator for women-founded, women-led companies. And then I mentioned Corliss, which is another nonprofit tax deduction. And then Impact Assets. So I've created Sophia Yen's Women Fund at Impact Assets, and I've invested in 5 different companies that do social good in this world, and 4 out of 5 are run by women. One of them is Eco Underwear. The other is lubricant for menopausal women. Another one is a cap that you wear during chemo to prevent hair loss. And then I did a wind company as well. And I've also done some other investments as well. But all of these can be done with a tax deductible donation. So if you need to like send some money, this is usually end of the year, and get your tax deduction, that's the time to look at it. Or if you have a donor advised fund, you just tell them to move it to this donor advised fund. It's a minimum of $25,000 per wherever you're going to invest in, plus 3% overhead fees for them to run that, but that's nothing. And then when the money comes back, you can invest it again in, social impact kind of companies. It has to have some social impact. So it can't just be straight up making money. It has to do some good in this world. But most things serving women do some good in this world. And check it out, Impact Assets.
Awesome. And then my final question for all of you, what's one of the best pieces of advice? I'm sure you've gotten many great pieces of advice. One of the best pieces of advice you've received as a founder that you want to share with all the founders listening in today?
Get a therapist. Take
It's a
care of
grind,
yourself. Take care of yourself. I actually just did a podcast on this topic on mental health for founders. Founders are
Listen to it.
to self-report a mental health condition. I've lost a founder who died by suicide years ago, and all I can say is like your life and your mental well-being is so much more important than this company. And you have to actively, no matter how hard things are at work, you have to actively set aside time, money, energy to take care of yourself.
Beautiful.
Mine is general. Hashtag stop sucking it up with respect to women's health. The number one cause of missed school and work is bad, evil periods. And women are like, oh, it's just life. If you aren't missing school and work, please see a doctor. And then menopause. A lot of physicians, well, it's just menopause. Suck it up. It's what it is to be a woman. If you are having any symptoms of menopause, if you are having any symptoms of endometriosis, fibroids, whatever, do not suck it up. Find a doctor that cares.
Mine is on surrounding, it kind of builds on Hallie's, but surround yourself with founders. It is easily even if you have co-founders, it is easily one of the most trying, loneliest, so many different adjectives I won't list right now, experiences. And yesterday, for example, I got together with 2 founders and we were able to we did a hackathon on all the problems we're going through, both personnel, company, things like that, where those are the support systems that you need in order to be like, okay, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one, because a lot of times you think, oh, I'm the only one going through this, just like you do in women's health. So I think having that support system of people at your stage and maybe one stage ahead is very, very, very powerful.
I feel like we ended on that because we seeded you to say that, Agya, because that is the entire reason for what we do is everything that you all mentioned. It is so important to prioritize yourself as a founder, and it's really hard to do. You have to be super intentional. You have to protect your health, and you have to surround yourself with people who understand what you're going through. And the reality is that even if you have a wonderful group of investors and cap table, no one replace having a founder at your side, because they're going to be going through it at the same time. So join 10th House. Yeah. Anyways, thank you all so much. Your wisdom is just ever flowing. And I feel like I have a million more questions for you, but I think this was extraordinarily helpful in giving us a window into how everyone can help to provide solutions to these problems and invest in it and get behind what you're doing.
Hold on one second.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.